Honey, your mother changed the password. I can't use her card anymore. I heard Isabella's shriek in the background, thin and sharp like shattering glass, before Daniel even spoke to me. It wasn't just frustration in her voice. It was the pure, unfiltered rage of an owner who'd had something they considered theirs wrongfully taken away. A moment of muffled noise followed, the sound of a phone being snatched, and then my son's voice, low and dangerous, filled the line, a chilling contrast to his wife's hysteria. "Mom, what did you do?" he asked, and the quiet fury in his tone was infinitely worse than any shouting. He didn't need to say where they were. "Hi, friends. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and now let's step right into the story." The glittering temple of consumerism where handbags cost more than my monthly pension and where I hadn't set foot in years. The part of town they lived in mentally, financially, and physically. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the stale air in my quiet little house suddenly feeling thick and heavy, difficult to draw into my lungs. The old grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Arthur's parents, chimed 3. Each tick felt like a hammer blow, marking the final seconds of my long, suffocating silence. "I changed my PIN, Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than my trembling hands. "It's my card." A beat of stunned silence. I could almost hear the calculations whirring in his head. Then the promise that was really a threat, the one that changed everything. "We're coming over. You are going to fix this." The line went dead, but the menace lingered, a toxic storm cloud gathering directly over my 68 years of life, preparing to unleash a deluge I knew I had to face. The guttural roar of Daniel's BMW tearing down my quiet suburban street was an assault, a violation of the unspoken peace that governed our neighborhood of modest 60-year-old brick houses. He didn't park carefully at the curb. He screeched into my driveway, his tires spitting gravel against my rose bushes. He didn't knock. The front door flew open, hitting the rubber stopper with a violent crack that made the whole frame shudder. I flinched, my hand flying to my chest. He stood there, my son, my 40-year-old boy, framed in the doorway like an avenging angel of commerce. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment ever did. His hair perfectly coiffed, a ridiculously expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. His face was a mask of tightly controlled rage. Isabella hovered behind him on the porch, a storm in silk and oversized designer sunglasses. Her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She didn't enter. She just watched, her arms crossed, a queen surveying a peasant's hovel with undisguised contempt. "Explain this," Daniel demanded, his voice low and tight as he stepped inside. He didn't take off his polished leather shoes, tracking a slurry of wet autumn leaves onto the rug my mother had braided by hand 50 years ago. I remained seated in my old armchair, the floral fabric worn smooth from the thousands of hours I'd spent grading papers and tutoring students to give him a better life. This chair was my fortress. "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. I changed the personal identification number on my credit card. That is my right." His laugh was a sharp, ugly bark of a sound, devoid of any humor. "You're right! You're right! Do you have any idea what you've done?" He began to pace the small living room, his energy too large and aggressive for the space. Isabella was standing at the checkout in Aveline. Aveline! She had a bag in her hand, the one she needs for the brand summit in Aspen next week. It's critical for her networking. And the card, your card, was declined. He gestured wildly, his movements jerky and enraged. In front of everyone, the sales associate, the other customers. They looked at her like she was a thief, like a fraud. You humiliated her. By extension, you humiliated me. My gaze drifted past his furious form to the mantelpiece, to the framed photo of me, my late husband Arthur, and a smiling 5-year-old Daniel at Elitch Gardens. a lifetime ago, when my son's smile was genuine. "The card, Daniel, and the money in that account belong to me," I stated, my voice low but firm, anchored by a resolve I hadn't felt in years. "It is my teacher's pension, my savings, my money." He stopped pacing and spun to face me, his finger jabbing the air between us. "We are a family." He spat the word as if it were an accusation. Family helps each other, family supports each other. Or have you forgotten that? Sitting here in this dusty, decaying house, counting your pennies while your son and his wife are out there building a future, creating a legacy. This isn't about money, it's about your selfishness, your complete and utter pettiness. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was a familiar one, a weapon he and Isabella had sharpened over the years, using it to carve away pieces of my confidence. But something in me had finally broken, and the wound had cauterized into something hard and unyielding. "It is very much about money, Daniel," I said, my hands gripping the worn arms of my chair to keep them from shaking. "It's about the unauthorized $600 spa package I found on my statement. It's about the $900 spent on designer clothes in a single afternoon. It's about the steady stream of new gadgets that appear in your house every week. It's about $30,000, Daniel. $30,000 of my money gone in the last 2 years. His face went pale, then flushed with a dark, blotchy red. The mask of a concerned son slipped, revealing something cold, calculating, and utterly unfamiliar underneath. "You're losing it," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a sad secret with an invisible audience. "You're getting old, confused. Your memory is failing. That's what this is. You're paranoid." He took a step closer, looming over me, using his height to intimidate. "Maybe Isabella and I should handle your finances. Take the burden off your shoulders. For your own good, Mom." The condescension was suffocating. "Give me the new pin," he said, his voice no longer pleading but commanding. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked up into the face of this stranger wearing my son's features, and I simply shook my head. A silent, final no. The fury returned to his eyes, raw and unfiltered. "Fine," he hissed. "Have it your way. Rot in this house alone with your precious money, but you will regret this. I promise you that." He turned and stalked out, slamming the door so hard the photo on the mantelpiece rattled in its frame and settled at a skewed angle. The silence he left behind was heavier, more final, and infinitely more lonely than the noise had been. Long after the angry growl of his engine faded into the distance, I remained in that armchair, the house groaning around me like an old ship in a heavy sea. His threat echoed in the sudden, profound silence. "You will regret this." My mind, however, didn't dwell on his anger. It drifted back, not out of the confusion he accused me of, but out of a desperate, primal need for clarity. I had to remember who I was before I became their personal, no-limit bank account. The smell of chalk dust and old paper is something that never really leaves you. For 40 years, it was my perfume, the scent of my purpose. I was Eleanor Peterson, a high school English teacher at East High School. My husband, Arthur, was a civil engineer, a kind, steady man with calloused hands who could build anything from a complex circuit board to a backyard deck that was the envy of the neighborhood. He smelled of sawdust and coffee. We bought this little brick house for $85,000, a staggering fortune back then, and we filled it with books, laughter, and the smell of my apple pies. Our life wasn't extravagant, but it was rich in a way Daniel and Isabella would never understand. When Daniel was 12, Arthur was killed in a car accident on his way home from work. A drunk driver ran a red light on Colorado Boulevard, and just like that, the sturdy foundation of our world was shattered into a million pieces. The life insurance was modest, just enough to pay off the house. My teacher's salary of $32,000 a year was barely enough to keep us afloat, but Daniel, my quiet, grief-stricken boy, became my entire world. He was all I had left of Arthur. So I worked. I taught from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Then I got in my aging Ford and drove to the wealthy enclave of Cherry Creek, where I tutored the children of doctors and lawyers from 4 until 7. I would come home, make dinner for Daniel, and then sit at my kitchen table, the same table where I now sorted through bank statements and grade papers until my eyes burned and the words swam together. Weekends were for more tutoring. I saved every single penny. The goal was singular, a mantra I repeated to myself in the dark hours of the night. The University of Denver. A business degree for him, so he wouldn't have to know the bone-deep exhaustion I lived with every day. I remember the day he got his acceptance letter. He was so happy. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before his father died. It was a glimpse of the boy he used to be. But the tuition was a mountain, and my savings were just a foothill. That evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, I took out my old jewelry box. Inside, nestled on worn, faded velvet, was a sapphire brooch. It was the first real gift Arthur ever gave me, bought with his first engineering paycheck. It was a deep cornflower blue, the color of his eyes, surrounded by a delicate filigree of tiny diamonds. It was my most precious possession, a tangible piece of our love story. The next day, I walked into a downtown pawn shop, the little bell above the door sounding like a death knell. I sold it. I got $4,500 for it. It felt like selling a piece of my own soul. But when I handed Daniel the cashier's check for his first tuition payment, the look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face made the sacrifice feel worth it. He graduated with honors, a degree in marketing, handsome and ambitious and full of promises. He promised he'd pay me back for everything, for the late nights, the tutoring, the brooch. He never did. A few years later, when I gently brought it up, he laughed it off. "Mom, think of it as an investment in the family," he'd said, a phrase that would become his go-to justification for every subsequent demand. I let it go. All I ever wanted was his happiness. I just never realized my happiness wasn't part of the equation. Love doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it slithers in, disguised in expensive shoes and a dazzling smile. Daniel met Isabella at a high-profile marketing networking event. She was an influencer and brand strategist, titles that sounded impressive and hollow at the same time. Her world was a meticulously curated series of perfect photos capturing expensive meals, exotic vacations, and an endless parade of designer clothes. When he brought her home to meet me, she was the epitome of charm. She gushed about my home, calling it so charming and authentically vintage, but her eyes, quick and sharp, darted around the room, cataloging the worn furniture, the faded wallpaper, the lack of a Sub-Zero refrigerator. I saw a flicker of undisguised disdain in her gaze before it was quickly masked by another brilliant smile. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a primal maternal instinct screaming a warning that I consciously, foolishly chose to ignore. I wanted Daniel to be happy, and Isabella, with her glamour and social connections, seemed to make him ecstatic. The wedding was a lavish affair at the Brown Palace Hotel, a spectacle far beyond their means. I contributed $10,000 from my retirement savings, a substantial portion of my nest egg. They accepted it not as a generous gift, but as their due. "It's an investment in our future, Mom," Daniel had said, that familiar refrain now a joint mantra. "The connections we make tonight will pay for themselves 100 times over." After the wedding, the change was gradual but deliberate, a slow, methodical erosion of my place in his life. My 60th birthday dinner was forgotten, replaced by a breezy last-minute text message. "So sorry, Mom, totally swamped at a brand event. Huge opportunity, rain check soon." The rain check, of course, never came. Anniversaries of Arthur's death, once a sacred day of quiet remembrance for Daniel and me, where we would visit the cemetery together, were now inconvenient interruptions to their busy social calendar. He'd call, his voice distracted and rushed, while I could hear Isabella's high-pitched laughter in the background as she talked to someone else. My home, once his sanctuary, became a place he visited out of grudging obligation. Isabella rarely came along. "The allergies," she'd claim, dabbing at her perfect nose with a tissue. "All this dust and old books, you know." The real allergy, I suspected, was to modesty, to a life that wasn't lived for public consumption and validation. They moved into a sleek, modern condo in Cherry Creek, a world of glass, steel, and stark white walls that felt as cold and sterile as their affection had become. The family photos that dotted my mantelpiece and bookshelves, pictures of me and Arthur, of a younger, happier Daniel covered in mud after a football game, had no place on their minimalist walls. I was being slowly, methodically erased from his present, relegated to a past he seemed increasingly ashamed of. They never asked about my life, my health, my friends from the school. Conversations, when they happened, were monologues revolving around them. Their brand, their social circle, their desperate climb up a glittering, treacherous ladder I didn't understand. I was no longer a mother, I was an anecdote, a footnote in the grand story of their success, the humble beginning they had so bravely overcome. And I let it happen. I bit my tongue and swallowed my hurt, telling myself this was the price of his happiness in this new, complicated world. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant silent companion in my quiet, dusty house. It was the sound of one teacup in the morning, the solitary click of the television remote in the evening, the heavy silence. The financial requests began not as a flood, but as a slow, insidious drip, each one eroding my defenses just a little more. At first, it was small amounts, wrapped in the language of affection and urgency. A text from Isabella littered with heart emojis. "Ellie, sweetie, had a little emergency with the car. Total nightmare. Could you Zelle us $250? Pay you back Friday, promise." The Friday never came. Then a call from Daniel, his voice a carefully calibrated mix of casualness and stress. "Mom, we're a little short for the condo fees this month. Just $400. We're waiting on a big brand deal to come through. It's just a cash flow thing." The money was sent from my meager savings account. The big brand deal, it seemed, never materialized. Each request was framed as a temporary setback, a minor hurdle on their glittering path to inevitable success. They weren't asking for a handout, they were graciously allowing me to invest in their future. The sums grew. The excuses became more elaborate and dramatic. They needed a new $1,000 laptop for her essential video editing. They needed to fly to Los Angeles for a conference that would change everything for their careers. The unspoken debt climbed to nearly $6,000, a figure that made my hands tremble whenever I looked at my bank balance. My teacher's pension was just $1,500 a month. I lived frugally. I always had. But this was a constant, terrifying drain, a hole in the bottom of my carefully managed resources. Then came the credit card. It was a calculated maneuver, executed with chilling precision. Isabella called me one afternoon, her voice a syrupy concoction of panic and affection. "Ellie, you won't believe what happened. I'm at the Whole Foods checkout and my wallet was stolen right out of my purse. It's an absolute nightmare. My cards, my ID, everything is gone." Her performance was flawless, down to the simulated sob. "Could I possibly borrow your card number just for this one time to buy groceries? I'll have Daniel bring the physical card right back to you this evening." I hesitated. A cold dread washed over me, a feeling that I was standing on a precipice. But the image she painted of her being stranded and helpless won out over my better judgment. With a heavy heart, I read the 16 digits and the security code over the phone. Daniel never brought the card back. It became their lifeline, their magic wand. At first, they were careful, trying to maintain the illusion of necessity. A tank of gas here, a week's worth of groceries there. But soon, the charges started to change, to reveal their true nature. A $75 lunch at a trendy bistro downtown, a $150 charge for a collagen-boosting serum from a skincare boutique. When I cautiously questioned a purchase, the guilt machine would spin into high gear with terrifying efficiency. "Mom, do you have any idea how hard it is to maintain a brand in this city?" Daniel would say, his voice laced with the weary disappointment of a genius explaining physics to a child. "Isabella needs to look a certain way. We have to project success to be successful. It's the cost of doing business. You just don't understand this world." I was made to feel old, irrelevant, and hopelessly out of touch, a relic from a bygone era who didn't grasp the complex pressures of their modern lives. They painted their self-indulgent extravagance as a professional necessity, and my quiet frugality as a character flaw. The manipulation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They isolated me with their condescension, making me doubt my own judgment, my own reality. They were my only family. If I pushed back, I risked losing them completely. So I stayed silent, watching my savings, the money Arthur and I had worked our whole lives to secure, bleed away one designer purchase, one overpriced meal at a time. I was a ghost at their feast. The final thread of my complicity snapped on a quiet Tuesday morning. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It was a sterile, automated phone call from the fraud prevention department of my bank, a disembodied voice that delivered the killing blow. "Ma'am, this is Card Services. We're calling to verify a charge of $1,500 made moments ago at a boutique called Aveline. Can you confirm this purchase?" Aveline. The name Daniel had spat at me with such venom during his tirade. $1,500. I stood motionless in my kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear, my gaze fixed on a framed photo of Arthur on the wall. It was from our 20th anniversary. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners, full of warmth and integrity. What would that man, the man who worked overtime for a month to buy me a new washing machine, think of the woman I had become? A doormat. A silent, endlessly replenished ATM for a woman who wouldn't have given him the time of day. My voice, when it came, was a whisper, dry and raspy. "No," I said, the single word a monumental effort. "No, I cannot confirm that." The agent was professional and detached, unaware he was witnessing the end of an era. "Very well. We will decline the charge and put a temporary block on your card for your protection, ma'am. We recommend you come into a branch at your earliest convenience to have a new card issued." I hung up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. $1,500 for a handbag. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, the contemptuous disregard for me, for my life's work, for Arthur's memory, was a physical slap in the face. It wasn't just money anymore. It was a theft of my dignity, my history, my very identity. That afternoon, I didn't go to the bank. The thought of facing a teller, of having to explain, was too humiliating. Instead, I sat at my old desktop computer, its fan whirring softly, and logged into my online bank account, something I hadn't done in months, preferring the painful simplicity of the paper statements that arrived like clockwork each month. With hands that trembled, I navigated through the menus to the security settings. A question flashed on the screen, stark and simple. Change personal identification number? A wave of pure cold fear washed over me. Fear of Daniel's anger, fear of their retaliation, fear of the final irreparable break with my only child. But underneath the fear was a tiny, hard kernel of something else, an emotion I had suppressed for so long I had almost forgotten its name. Anger. My anger. It was a righteous, cleansing fire. I thought of the sapphire brooch, sold for a fraction of its worth. I thought of the lonely birthdays and the condescending lectures on branding. I thought of the $30,000 vanished into a vortex of their vanity. I typed in 4 new numbers, numbers that had meaning only to me. the year Arthur and I were married. A confirmation message appeared on the screen. Your PIN has been successfully changed. It was the most rebellious, most terrifying, most liberating thing I had done in more than a decade. I knew the storm was coming. I knew Daniel's rage would be biblical. But for the first time in years, sitting alone in my silent house, I didn't feel weak or afraid. I felt the solid ground of my own self-respect beneath my feet. Let the storm come. I had finally built a shelter. Daniel's threat was not an idle one. Exactly 1 week after he stormed out of my house, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived by certified mail, demanding a signature. My hand shook as I signed for it. Inside, on crisp, expensive letterhead from a prestigious downtown law firm, was a formal notice. It stated that their client, Mr. Daniel Peterson, intended to file a petition for conservatorship over my person and my estate, citing my recent erratic behavior, documented paranoia, and demonstrated inability to manage financial affairs. They were going to have me declared legally incompetent. The words swam before my eyes, blurring through a sudden rush of tears. My own son, my little boy, whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose nightmares I had soothed with lullabies, was trying to strip me of my most basic human rights, to make me a prisoner in my own life, a ward of the very people who had robbed me. I dropped the letter on the kitchen table as if it were burning my fingers and sank into a chair, the weight of this ultimate betrayal crushing the air from my lungs. I would have given up then. In that moment of absolute despair, I truly believe I would have just let them win. But then, there was a firm, familiar knock on my back door. It was Clara, my neighbor for 40 years. A retired ER nurse, she was sharp as a tack and possessed a spine of pure steel. She took one look at my tear-streaked face, saw the official-looking letter on the table, and wordlessly pulled up a chair. She read it, her lips tightening into a thin, grim line. "The greedy, godless little monsters," she said, her voice devoid of any sympathy for them, only fierce loyalty for me. "Eleanor, this isn't a family squabble anymore. This is a legal attack. This is war, and you can't fight it alone." She knew a lawyer, a man named Julian Croft, who had helped one of her friends in a similar heartbreaking situation. He specialized in elder financial abuse. "He's not cheap," she warned, placing her warm, dry hand over mine. "But he's a bulldog. He doesn't let go." The next day, Clara drove me to Julian Croft's downtown office. It was a world away from my cozy home, clean, organized, and quietly intimidating. Julian himself was a man in his late 60s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor that belied his fierce reputation. I sat across his large mahogany desk and told him everything, my voice faltering as I laid out the decade of sacrifice, manipulation, and systematic theft. I brought my shoebox full of bank statements, my monuments to their greed. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression compassionate but unreadable, occasionally making a quiet note on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, the shameful story hanging in the air between us, he looked from me to the pile of statements. "They were sloppy," he said, and for the first time I heard a hint of steel in his voice. "And arrogant. People like this always believe they're too smart to get caught. That's how we'll get them." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of discovery. Julian was methodical, relentless. He and his investigator found things I never would have. He cross-referenced every suspicious charge on my statements with Isabella's public social media accounts. There she was, posting a smiling photo with the hashtag #WarSpaDay on the exact day a $200 charge from the Serenity Spa appeared on my card. There she was again, posing with a new drone, the day a $700 charge from a high-end tech store hit my account. The smoking gun was a photo of my credit card, front and back, found in a shared family cloud account, carelessly left there by Daniel, a testament to his supreme arrogance. But the real blow, the one that knocked the wind out of me completely, came a week later. Julian sat me down in his office, his expression grave. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle, "I'm afraid it's worse than we thought. They didn't just use your existing card. They used your personal information, your social security number, your date of birth, to open 3 online store credit accounts in your name." He slid a credit report across the polished desk. My name was at the top, but the debts listed below were theirs. $20,000. In addition to the $30,000 they had already siphoned from my savings. The room tilted. $50,000. They had not only drained my past, but they had also stolen my future. When Julian sent their lawyer a blistering letter detailing our findings and the impending criminal fraud charges, the real harassment began. Obscene words were spray-painted on my garage door, under the cover of darkness. Anonymous, threatening notes were left on my car windshield. They started a vicious whispering campaign in the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I had dementia, that I was becoming a danger to myself and others. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness for so long, they'd forgotten the steel underneath. I was a teacher who had managed classrooms of unruly teenagers for 40 years. I was a widow who had raised a son on her own in the face of grief. I was Arthur Peterson's wife, and I was done being their victim. The courtroom felt like a sterile, cold theater, set for a tragedy. The air was thick with the smells of old paper, stale coffee, and a faint, cloying perfume I recognized as Isabella's. She and Daniel sat at the opposing table, looking sleek, prosperous, and deeply concerned. Isabella was dressed in a conservative but obviously expensive navy blue dress, her face a carefully constructed mask of worried sincerity. Daniel, my son, kept trying to catch my eye across the room, attempting to offer a sad, pitying smile, as if this whole proceeding was a terrible misunderstanding brought on by my failing, fragile mind. I refused to meet his gaze. I focused instead on Julian, who sat beside me, a bastion of calm, righteous competence. Their lawyer, a slick man with a practiced smile and a voice like warm oil, opened the proceedings by painting a heartbreaking picture of a beloved but tragically confused elderly mother. He spoke of her episodes of paranoia, her increasing social isolation, and her inability to recall recent financial transactions. He presented Daniel and Isabella as dutiful, loving children, forced to take this drastic legal step for her own protection and well-being. It was a masterful, disgusting performance. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, hearing him twist my reality, even I almost believed him. Then it was Julian's turn to speak. He didn't use theatrics or emotional appeals. He used cold, hard facts, each one a hammer blow to their carefully constructed fiction. He began by calling Isabella to the stand. He projected one of her Instagram photos onto a large screen for the entire court to see. It was her, smiling vacantly, holding a $500 Avaline clutch purse. The caption beneath it read, "Treating myself. A girl's gotta have nice things. Jean's boss babe. He need luxury life." Julian then produced my credit card statement from that exact same day, with the corresponding $500 charge from Avaline clearly visible. He did this again and again and again. A spa day complete with champagne, documented with a selfie and a hashtag, perfectly matched with a charge on my card. A weekend getaway to a mountain resort, showcased in a dozen photos, all paid for from my retirement account. A new smartphone unboxed for her followers, charged to me. With each piece of evidence, Isabella's composure began to crack. The mask of sincerity slipped, revealing the raw avarice beneath. Next, Julian presented the IP address logs from the online stores, where the fraudulent credit accounts had been opened in my name. All of them, without exception, traced back to one physical location: Daniel and Isabella's condo in Cherry Creek. Their lawyer objected repeatedly, his voice growing shriller each time. But the judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, overruled him every time, her gaze fixed on my son and his wife. The final, irrefutable blow was the testimony of my doctor of 15 years. Dr. Evans confirmed under oath that I was in excellent mental and physical health and concluded by stating I had a mind sharper and more cogent than most people half my age. Julian rested his case. The judge removed her reading glasses and looked from my face to the pale, stricken faces of Daniel and Isabella. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, heavy, and damning. Her gaze was withering. "I have heard the arguments presented today," she said, her voice ringing with a cold, clear authority that filled the room. "And what I see here is not a case of a concerned son seeking to protect his mother from her own decline. I see a calculated, predatory, and frankly disgusting scheme of familial, financial predation." She turned her full, formidable attention to Daniel and Isabella. "Your petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. You will repay Ms. Peterson the full $30,000 you have stolen from her savings, with interest. The fraudulent debts of $20,000 accrued in her name are hereby nullified and are now your sole legal responsibility. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. You will not come within 500 feet of Ms. Peterson or her property. You will not contact her by any means." She looked directly at me, and for the first time, her expression softened with something that looked like empathy. "Ma'am, I am truly sorry for what you have endured." Then her gaze hardened again as she looked back at them. She banged her gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "This court is adjourned." Daniel stared, his mouth agape, his carefully crafted world in ruins. Isabella was now openly weeping, not tears of remorse, but hot, ugly tears of rage and defeat. I felt nothing but a vast, quiet, and profound relief. As Julian and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Colorado sunshine, I felt the warmth on my face for what felt like the first time in years. It was over. I was free. The year that followed was one of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. It was like reclaiming a garden that had been left to run wild with poisonous, strangling weeds. You couldn't just admire it from a distance. You had to get your hands dirty, pull things out by the root, and decide what was worth keeping. The first thing I did was hold an estate sale. I sold many of the things in my house that held painful memories tied to Daniel's later years. I used the money from the sale, along with the first court-ordered repayment check from Daniel, to hire a contractor. He built a small, beautiful sunroom off the kitchen, a place filled with light and warmth and plants. Clara helped me pick out the flowers. It became my favorite room, a symbol of new growth. My professional relationship with Julian, born out of crisis and legal strategy, slowly and unexpectedly blossomed into something more. It started with coffee after our final legal meetings, then dinners where we talked about everything but the law. He was a widower, too, his wife having passed away from cancer 5 years prior. We found a comfortable, unhurried solace in each other's company. We had both known deep love and profound loss. He was kind, intelligent, and he looked at me not as a fragile old woman who needed saving, but as his equal, a woman of substance and strength. He made me laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that I thought had died inside me long ago. We discovered a shared love for classical music, old black and white films, and long, meandering walks in Washington Park. 1 year to the day after the court verdict, under the golden leaves of an autumn aspen, Julian took my hand, looked me in the eye, and asked me to marry him. And I, Eleanor Peterson, a 70-year-old retired teacher who thought her life was over, said yes without a moment's hesitation. We were married in a simple, elegant ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens, surrounded by a small group of our closest friends. Clara, my steadfast rock, was my matron of honor, beaming brighter than anyone. About a month after the wedding, as Julian and I were enjoying a quiet breakfast in our new sunroom, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and my stomach clenched. It was Daniel. I hadn't spoken to him or seen him in over a year. My first instinct was to reject the call, to protect the fragile peace I had fought so hard to win. But Julian, who was sitting across the table from me, saw the look on my face, reached across and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. I took a deep breath and answered. His voice was almost unrecognizable. The arrogance, the condescension, the controlled fury, it was all gone, replaced by a hollow, broken tone. "Mom?" he said, the word tentative, as if he were unsure I would still answer to that name. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." He told me in a rambling, disjointed monologue that Isabella had left him. The court-ordered repayments were crippling them, their credit was ruined, and the brand had collapsed. She had found a new, wealthier benefactor and had vanished from his life, leaving him with all the debts. He was losing their condo. He was alone. He began to cry, deep, racking sobs of a man who had lost everything because he had never truly valued anything he couldn't buy. I listened quietly, without anger or triumph. I felt a faint pang of ancient, vestigial love, the ghost of the mother I used to be, but it was overshadowed by the profound peace I now inhabited. "I forgive you, Daniel," I said, and to my own surprise, I realized I meant it. "I forgive you for my own sake, so that I don't have to carry that anger anymore. It is a burden I no longer wish to bear, but I cannot go back. The woman you knew, the one who would fix everything, is gone." I wished him well, truly, and then I gently, firmly hung up the phone. Sitting here now in my bright, warm sunroom, with Julian's hand holding mine, I look back at the wreckage of my old life. I lost a son, yes, and that is a grief that will always live in a small, quiet corner of my heart. But I found myself. I found my strength, my voice, and a deep, abiding love I never expected to have again. I learned that you are never too old to fight for your own dignity, and that sometimes the most broken foundations can be cleared away to build something even more beautiful and resilient than before. Thanks for listening. If any part of this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences, share your thoughts below. I value every comment. And if you'd like to join me for more stories, hit like and subscribe. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.